everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the owner of the Eisner Award-winning comic shop in Portland, Books with Pictures. It's Katie Pryde. Thanks for coming on, Katie.
So happy to be here.
I love the fact that, I think it was OPB, it's Oregon Public Broadcasting. I love the fact that when you Google Books with Pictures, one of the first articles that comes up is basically an article that says, Portland comic shop named best comic shop in the world. It's pretty amazing.
I love it. It's good stuff. Before we won the Eisner, the first hit was always also an OPB story that was basically like, bang, pow, comics aren't just for boys anymore. And that was a lovely piece, but it's nice to be able to be, hey, this woman-run comic store is one of the best stores in the world, rather than just a girl in comics.
Wow. Yeah. Anytime you can have a Google result saying you're the best of anything in the world, that is pretty fantastic. But we're recording this on Thursday, March 6th. It is the first day of Emerald City Comic Con. Both of us are not there, much to our chagrin. How are you doing?
Oh, the cat was just in like a full blep.
Oh, yeah?
It was very exciting that she's done now. She realized that she looked like an absolute moron. But it was a good, 30 seconds of her tongue just entirely hanging out of her mouth.
So I'm going to assume you're amazing right now because you just had ultra blep going on.
I just got to watch that. No, things are good at the shop. It's, early spring money is always tight, but we've had a few days of good weather, which does usually translate to better sales. I personally have been dealing with some chronic illness stuff, so getting ready to go out for a couple weeks after some surgery I've got coming up. So, it's a little bit of a ride there in terms of just not wanting to overextend because of the chronic illness, but also wanting to get ahead of stuff that I won't be able to deal with. And it's like tax season, so I need to get my taxes done before I check out of the universe. So it's a lot. It's pretty nonstop around here, but it's, the comics are great.
I was on Adam Freeman's podcast recently, Comic Industry Insiders, and I think I said something along the lines of, comics has got half the equation figured out all the time, which is that the comics are great. And if the comics are great, there's hope, right?
Yep. I absolutely entirely agree with that. If you give me good comics, I can do my job. So, yeah, the comics are great.
Yeah. How many employees do you have now? Is it 2?
It's 4.
4. Okay. That puts you in a better position, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's, I've been basically scheduled off the floor since the beginning of December, just because I've been in unpredictable levels of pain. It is really hard to be good at customer service when you feel crappy. So I do find I probably order smarter when I'm dealing with pain, because it makes me a bit of an asshole. And it makes me less likely to give sketchy looking listings the benefit of the doubt. And I'll just be like, no, that's going to suck. Don't buy that. Don't even buy 4 copies. It's going to be bad, which is really, it's a skill that I sometimes lack. So that's good.
I'm glad you're finding an upside to that. But, you've been scheduled off the floor since December. You do live rather near your comic shop. Do you find it hard ever to kind of separate when you're supposed to separate?
Absolutely. And scheduled off the floor means that there are no times that I am scheduled to be alone on the floor.
Oh, okay.
So there's always somebody in the shop who's not me, which is not our usual sort of staffing schedule. What I do find is that it is almost impossible for me to just pop into the store for a minute to, I just need to pick up some stamps and some envelopes because I'm mailing bills out today, or, that sort of thing. Largely because I almost always run into either a customer I really like, a family who it's their first time in the shop, somebody with a really good dog, something. And then I get pulled into the customer conversation, which I love having and is really, it's my favorite thing about doing this job. And I do, my mood is worse when I'm not spending time on the floor, but also my energy levels are unpredictable these days and I can't rely on myself to be on the floor. So it's definitely a conflict.
I know you had other work before you did Books with Pictures that had absolutely nothing to do with comic books. Do you find it harder to turn off since you started Books with Pictures?
No.
No?
It's absolutely the same. I've always been this way.
Oh, okay.
Turning off has never been a strong skill of mine. I do think that grad school made it worse because when I was in graduate school, I was studying the history of science, and the general status when I was doing coursework was that there was always more work assigned than any human being could do, which meant that you kind of had to put hard lines around, like, this is my rest time, because otherwise there's never any rest time. You just have to say, we are stopping now, even though the work is not done, because the work was never going to be done. And then when I moved into the sort of dissertation phase, I was splitting my time between teaching undergraduate courses and writing. And again, like you do writing. Writing is the project that it's never done. You just find your deadline, right?
Hmm.
So that was a rough context for managing work-life balance. I was better at it when my kids were very small, but then I was also doing a lot of traveling and consulting. So I would be like out of town and 100% on, and then in town and doing some parenting alongside the work. But no, I work a lot.
This might surprise you. I'm actually really good at turning off on my day job. As soon as I'm out, 100%. I go on vacation, I'm 100% out. The funny thing is, I'm horrible at turning off my comic stuff because, like you talked about writing, most of my writing is done before I actually sit and write, if that makes any sense.
Yes, I'm just the same.
Yeah, you're thinking about it. And by the time, like, I wrote this article this week about DC and Marvel, it took me like 2 hours because I had already kind of figured out the entire structure and everything I wanted to say before I even sat down. And I always say I'm like the stenographer of my own thoughts.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, you like that clean copy, and so you wanna have it all worked out structurally, the argument, all of it in your head, and then you've been doing this long enough that it'll be pretty functional by the time it gets onto the page.
I'd hope so. Well, let's talk about something else involving you being on. You recently returned from ComicsPRO's annual meeting in Glendale, California. ComicsPRO, for listeners that don't know, is a trade organization for comic shops, and its annual meeting has gotten... I went in 2018 in Portland when they also had an Image Expo, and it was a pretty big deal then, but this year felt like it was really big. How was it this year?
Was extraordinary. I do wish I had been feeling better because I did wind up watching a lot of presentations on the live stream from my hotel room rather than being in the room all the time. But it was an extraordinary conference. Being in LA meant that we had basically the entire DC Comics team in the room a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
We had Matt Rosenberg and the Tiny Onion team through this amazing party that was like not affiliated with any publisher. It was just creators throwing a party for retailers. And in a lot of ways, that kind of summed up my sense of what ComicsPRO was about this year was the creators and the publishers coming together with the retailers and saying, even if distribution is chaotic right now, the people who make comics and the people who sell comics are going to work this out.
Yeah.
And that felt great that I got to go to a big dinner with the Tiny Onion team and wound up, when you're at a like long table and you lean out the back and like talk behind the backs of the people
Mm-hmm.
in between you. I had a long chat with James, which was basically just about that. He was like, the point of Tiny Onion is that we can be creating great comics with lots of different publishers, but also so that we're not tied to any particular structure of publishing, and we can just make sure that the books get to you guys. And I'm like, that's all I want to do, man. I just want to put your books in the world. So that felt good. That said, Penguin Random House has always made a good showing. Lunar was definitely like turned up and ready to be in the conversation. Diamond did not officially come.
Mm-hmm.
There were folks either from Diamond or recently laid off from Diamond there. Stuart Schreck turned up at parties after hours and was just chatting about the way of things. And then a fellow named John from Diamond UK was there, mostly to just say, Diamond UK is actually fine. We're not bankrupt. We're in the black. And if you are dependent on Diamond UK for anything, we look forward to continuing to be your partners under whoever our new overlords are after we're sold in April. But he was mostly there to be like a stabilizing part of the conversation. I was surprised that we didn't have more presence from Universal Distribution there because they're sort of vying to be the next new player in the scene. They were at the conference in, I want to say 2019, but I don't think we've seen them since. So I look forward to seeing what goes on with Universal, but they still, and I know that like they are distributing to US shops now. They are the alternate distributor for DC for people who find Lunar too distasteful to do business with. There's definitely people doing Universal for their DC comics right now. So I look forward to seeing what goes on with them. But really, the standouts were the creator presentations. The Tiny Onion team, Chip Zdarsky being everywhere all at once, all the time. DC brought Matt Fraction, who we are now officially calling Bat Fraction.
Mm.
In, he said they were sneaking him around like Rihanna backstage at a Beyonce concert. Not entirely sure what that means. I
Just
could have
always
gotten it
shrouded so no one could
backwards.
see
Yes,
him.
no, like shrouded, like so that nobody knew he was there. I didn't know he was there. Bless. I texted Kelly Sue, your husband is here. She replied, "Is that where he is?" I'm sure he let her know. But those sorts of things were just really nice, as well as like the announcement with Murray Javins and CB
Yeah.
they were delightful. They had a whole bit worked out. It's very lovely seeing otherwise, editorial people doing a bit. It was great.
It seemed like there was a number of bits. Like Chip was up there for Matt's thing, where the handoff, where didn't he walk off like Charlie Brown being really sad?
Yeah. Yeah, and then stood in the back looking like a proud dad at a dance recital the whole time that Matt was talking. Chip was just like glowing at him. It was so cute. Yeah, all of that stuff was really good and striking. And then I also wound up just having a lot of really good one-on-one meetings and conversations about ComicsPRO stuff, about my new project. I haven't told you about my new project, David Harper.
Is it beyond the Comet standard? We've talked about that before. What is the new project?
It's called the Graphic Novel Library.
Oh, I'm interested in finding out about the graphic novel library.
Yeah, I'm gonna sidebar it here, but I was definitely taking meetings about the graphic novel library. That went really well. And also just so much Hollywood.
I think the interesting thing is I was trying to rate this in my brain where once upon a time it seemed like, let's say San Diego was the big con for announcements. And then kind of it felt like it was transitioning a little bit towards C2E2 for Marvel in particular, and New York Comic Con in general is always really big. But I do think it's interesting how heavily prioritized ComicsPRO has become, especially this year, where I suspect it has nothing to do with the fact, well, it might have something to do with it, but they had to have been planning even before Diamond announced their bankruptcy that big things were going to be coming here.
Yep.
Do you think the perception of this as an event, both with creators and publishers, has shifted very quickly recently?
I do. I think the Comet Standard actually has a big part of it in that with the Comet Standard, we were able to identify a real need that was shared between all the different players in the industry. And it was the first time in a really long time that we've got all those people in the same room and talking to each other about the same set of issues and collaborating. The Comet Standard in the past year has been very much working under the surface, and my beloved Heidi even had some grouchy words to say about the status of the Comic Standard in her post today. But what's really going on is that a lot of coders are working on it, and coding is slow, and corporate priorities keep getting in the way and whatever. But we're going to have some big announcements by the end of the month. They just weren't done in time for the meeting. But it really sort of set the stage for ComicsPRO is the place where all of the interest in comics can be on relatively neutral ground.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that's happened is that with moving away from sort of Diamond as the center of mass, Penguin Random House is too big of a corporation to be the center of mass in comics. They are a very professional distributor of books, and I adore Tyne and her team for marketing. But Penguin Random House as an entity it's just not going to be on the side of the direct market all the time because they have their own interests. And so I really think that the need for neutral ground has moved toward leaning on ComicsPRO, which as a member of the board, I love. I do think that this was also a meeting where we saw some of the sort of Bush League stuffs about ComicsPRO meetings really start to pull at the seams a little bit. So things like we really don't plan our signage very well before a conference, but the attendance was larger. And so we were literally just scribbling on the backs of other pieces of signage to say where to go for your classes. The hotel could not seem to figure out how to turn off the air conditioning. It was very cold. There are definitely things. Oh, all of the talks where all of these amazing announcements happened in front of a blank hotel backdrop, which means that all of the amazing photos that people took have no ComicsPRO branding on them.
Oh boy.
That is an amateur move. So that sort of thing, I think we're really starting to see where those limits are and where we sort of, as an organization, need to level up in order to meet the needs of retailers and of the industry right now.
And it's growing pains.
I'm excited about it. Like,
Yeah.
it's good. It's good stuff. It's just, you see those hiccups. And I think when I look at something like the American Booksellers Association, which is just a much more polished organization, I feel like ComicsPRO, in terms of professionalization, is moving more in that direction. And I'm really excited about it. I think it's a really good set of moves.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. From Oni Press comes the true story of the viral hoax so insane it could only be told as a comic book. From the mind of writer, comedian, actor, musician Dave Hill and breakout artist Artyom Topolin comes the shockingly true, terrifyingly hilarious, and only modestly exaggerated tale of how one stand-up comedian forged a secret online identity and accidentally started an international incident almost wiped Gary, Indiana off the map. Believe it or not, this story is true, and at last can be told in all of its unholy glory, only in the pages of Dark Regards #1, the comic so extreme there is human blood in it. Seriously, one of the covers has human blood in the ink. That's gross, but also awesome. So, demand Dark Regards #1 from your local comic retailer by April 21st, and look for it on shelves this May. And now, back to the show. Well, and also, you recognize the weaknesses. Now you just have to act on them for next year, which is going to be at Glendale again, right?
I hope so. The negotiations are negotiating, but it is our hope to be there again, yeah.
I already told somebody was texting me and they're like, you should have been there. And I was like, I will be there next year if it's there. The only problem was I made my decision to go way too late. And by the time I did, it was like unbelievably expensive to get there from Alaska because I could get into LAX, but then I'd have to like travel for, I don't know, it's a bunch of big baby stuff.
This is flying into Burbank is one of my favorite airports. It's right up there with Portland, honestly, for favorite airports. But if you're not flying from the right place, it's very expensive to get into.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised by it, but I did want to ask about one of the things that was, I don't know, heartening about it. You mentioned like the We Love Comics party, the one that Ashcan Press, Matthew Rosenberg and James Tynan, Tiny Onion, and I think Jerry Duggan was involved, and I think Zdarsky Comic News was technically involved too.
That is correct. Those things all sound right.
Yeah, so they had this whole party. It seemed like there was a lot of really good vibes, not just at the party, but like everywhere. There's always me whining and dining, but there's also just, it felt like a lot of positive energy going into it from the outside. Was that your read? Did it feel different in that regard as well?
Yeah. ComicsPRO in general, there's always January and February are so hard for comic shops. And it means, on the one hand, that it's actually a pretty good time for retailers to get away from their shops. And on the other hand, it means that they are absolutely terrified about money. Like, everybody is like, I'm not selling any books this year. And it's like, well, it's February. So there's always a lot of grousing beforehand, bankruptcy, even without the bankruptcy. And then we get there and we're also happy to see each other, and the vibes tend to be very good.
Yeah.
So it's always a very upbeat meeting, but the sense of that plus the sort of San Diego energy of all of my favorite people are here was amazing. It was genuinely so good. I also do want to say the Ignition Press sponsorship of the convention, the tote bags they gave us, which like they don't have sample books to give us yet. So they were just there to hold our other sample books, but also had instant coffee and liquid IV and hand sanitizer. It was great.
That is amazing. Yeah, it does seem like being in LA, like the greater LA, was really advantageous because you had publishers nearby. I mean, I saw Ed Brubaker showed up, and like he did, just because he's there. And I mean, we love Comics Party at the very least.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had a lot of people that probably went to the event because of the location alone. I mean, it's different. Like in Portland, you're gonna have a lot of people show up. When I went, there was random people just showing up all the time. But I know it had been was it Pittsburgh the year before?
We'd been in Pittsburgh for 2 years.
Yeah, and it's no slander to Pittsburgh. I hear it's a fine city, but not exactly a hotbed for comics in general. And so it seems like LA was advantageous in a lot of ways.
Yeah, Pittsburgh is a much better budget destination, and it's also there are so many Midwestern comics retailers, and it definitely meant that Midwesterners and East Coast folks who find Portland a reach were able to be at the Pittsburgh meeting. There are definitely faces I missed because getting all the way to LA this year was just too far.
Mm-hmm.
That said, oh my God, LA's great. Like the sunshine was great. The warmth was very nice. That We Love Comics Party, I was pretty ill for it, unfortunately. And my goal, so I had been at a dinner with Oni, and then in a like premium dad move, Hunter Goranson decided that we were just going to walk from dinner to the party venue because it wasn't that far. And then, LA just LA'd at us. And it was not that far, but some of the bits that we walked through were a little bit gritty. And it was just like me and Hunter power walking to get to this party. It was like a mile away. It was fun. And then I got there and I was like, oh God, I feel terrible. I'm just going to walk to the back of this party and back to the front. And then I'm going to get a car and I'm going to go home.
And that took 5 hours.
And it took 5 hours because I just kept seeing people. Cena Grace was there.
Oh, wow, Cena.
Cena had just been in my shop the week before and I had missed him. Then there he was at the party in LA, which makes sense because he lives there. But it was so nice to see him, especially since I just missed him in Portland. But it did really feel like I just walked to the back of the room and the front again was all you could do. And the party the next night, the Bad Idea Party, was also spectacular at Revenge of, which is a comic shop / video game / bar.
It's got a lot of pinball in it, doesn't it?
Pinball, yeah. And I got to meet some folks who had worked on the Criminal set up here in Portland who were there because showbiz. Yeah, just a ton of folks and very upbeat, good energy.
I love it. We're going to circle back to Graphic Novel Library here in a bit. I do want to talk about your shop Books with Pictures in Portland, Oregon.
Please.
I know I'm getting ahead of myself here, but you are coming up on the big 1-0 next year. How are you feeling 9 years in? You made a face when I said that. Are you already pre-worried about what you're going to do next year?
Worried is the wrong term. I'm sure that we will have a lovely time. I'm agog. Somehow 8 years was close enough to 5 years and the pandemic broke time anyway. And so when I was in the last year, it didn't feel like we were established. And this year people are like, how long have you been around? And I'm like, we're coming up on our 9 years.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. That's real time. I'm a grizzled veteran. I also had several people report to me at the conference this year that they had been told beforehand that I was scary.
Oh.
I love this. I feel like 25-year-old me would have been like, oh no, what did I do? I don't want to be scary. How can I be more approachable to you? And now I'm just like, nah, scary's good. You should be scared. I'm mostly a very nice person, but if you give me a slate of 6 new comic books, 6 new books, and there is one named woman and all she is doing is a variant cover, you should be scared, man. I'm going to make you look very dumb. I'm going to ask if you forgot about it. Listen, Dinesh.
Whoa, you said it. Oh, I guess it
He
wasn't a
knows.
bad idea. Oh, yeah. No, I'm sure you
Yeah.
had that conversation. The first time I interviewed you was before Sketch even exists. It was for an email newsletter I did called The Crossover, which was just me doing random stuff before I figured things out. And I was thinking, I was like, how long has Books with Pictures been around? And it was kind of, so actually, it wasn't before Sketch. It was in my little break. It was in after Sketch 1.0, and it is kind of staggering to think about. But how much do you think the shop? I mean, obviously, you literally physically moved down the street, but you still moved. How much do you think the shop has changed over that time?
Not a ton.
Yeah,
By which I mean I had a really clear vision for what I wanted to do, and for the most part, what we have done is just sort of grow into that vision. At this point, we've been in the new space for coming up on 6 years. 6 years since I signed the papers on it. I can still look back at my business plan. So for my business plan, I wrote a page of like ideal customer profiles. Here are 10 different imaginary people who are going to shop with me. And I could now look at that list of imagined customers and name them. Like these are actual people who shop with me. We are constantly getting new people moving into the neighborhood, or increasingly right now, we are getting lots of sort of gender and sexuality refugees coming in from other parts of the country and moving to Portland because it's safer for them. And are we primed to be their comic shop? Yes, we are. So those folks are really exciting to get to be welcoming to and of service to. And also, what we do is exactly what they're coming to Portland to find. And so there's just this really beautiful match there. But these are all the things that we've been doing all along. I hosted our second wedding in December,
Oh, wow.
and we will be hosting our second funeral in April. So milestones all around. And, the little girl who was born the week we opened is a second grader, third grader.
I think probably a third grader.
Third grader, and has really strong opinions about her comic books, which she comes in every week to buy.
Yeah.
So it's amazing and exciting. And I had a customer bring, it's not even the first time, I guess. I had a customer bring his baby as her like first outing into the world.
That's amazing.
Her name is Sylvie. She is named for a Loki.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I think is amazing. Like, Books with Pictures hosted the end of Rose City Comic Con party this past year, at the very least. Might have been before that too.
Yep.
And it was interesting to see like photos from there. Everyone was there. Everyone was there.
Yeah.
And it seems like even in a very comic heavy town, there's a lot of great shops, there's a lot of creators, there's publishers, there's everything like that. It seems like you've really carved out a real community there. And I think that is, I mean, that was probably a huge part of your business plan to begin with.
It was. It was the month before we opened, Jay Edidin and I took 2 flats of homemade cupcakes and a large bunch of balloons to the Helioscope headquarters and said, "Hi, we're opening a new comic shop and we would like to be friends." And Jay already knew all those guys, but I didn't. And it was just sort of the introduction and invitations to our opening party. And I sort of stood there and met everybody all at once. We really have been, especially that studio, we've really been their shop ever since. And they just moved 5 blocks from here. So they're now, you can walk from here to Helioscope. It's really nice.
And Steve does portfolio reviews. Is it one Friday every week?
It's the first Friday of the month.
First Friday of the month. Yeah. I mean, that's cool. I mean, like that type of thing is, I wish I had that. I love my shop, don't get me wrong, but we don't have that type of like interaction. And I think that stuff is really special. But I do want to ask about the years so far in the shop, with the caveat and the awareness of something you already talked about, that it is the first quarter, and the first quarter is always a bit slower for publishing in general, but in comics, absolutely. And it's also an incredibly weird and frustrating and challenging start of the year for so many reasons that we don't necessarily have to get into. How have things been of late for Books with Pictures?
Ups and downs.
Yeah.
I will say, like, I love having the staffing level that we have. I love that I've got people I can rely on in the store. It is not always easy to get all the bills paid. One of the reasons for that is sort of the bigger picture of the whole network we have going here. We had to evict a couple of our food carts for non-payment last year, and the ecosystem is running well when there are 3 or 4 food carts out there, and I've had only one paying rent for a little over a year. What that means is that the shop isn't just paying the shop's bills. The shop is responsible for paying the building's bills and my groceries and like things that when we opened the shop wasn't always responsible for paying for.
Right.
So in a lot of ways, we keep doing better, but the problem keeps getting harder. That said, I think last week I put out a distress call that we were 15% down year over year from the year before. And like first quarter, it's 2.5 months, 15% can come and go, right? And we are back to about even to last year. It's not a comfortable financial place, but it's all right. We'll make it up in June. But I do feel like I said before, like new people are finding us all the time. And that's really exciting.
It is interesting how you have that kind of like the bat signal where if you put out that word, your community shows up for you. But, and this is in no way me disparaging them because people got stuff going on. It's hard to like stay on top of things sometimes. But that is like one of the tricky things that always seems to be is like people love their shops. People want to support them. There's all these different ways to do it. But it's like, how do you do that consistently? Like, how do you keep people coming in? I do want to say, I love your email newsletter and not just because you link off panel in there.
I did twice last week,
I
but
saw.
only because they were very good.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. But the thing about it is like I actually learn about books in there, which is amazing because I am like extremely tuned in. I have no idea how I miss things. And I'm just like, oh, this is great. Like between your newsletter and Challenger's one, I feel like I'm always learning about books, which is fantastic. But
I read the Challenger's one too. It's very good.
it is very good. But I mean, it is interesting how like that can be tricky. Like I remember Escape Pod was running into that where like they just wanted people to come into their shop and buy books. And sometimes it can be tricky to activate your audience in some way. It seems like yours responds, but I don't know. I guess in some ways it'd be nice if it was more consistent, but I don't know. Beggars can't be choosers, I guess.
Well, and that's what subscriptions are for, right?
Right.
Theoretically, that's what subscriptions are for. And it works and then it doesn't. The financial uncertainty of this year has really hit our people hard.
Yeah.
And I have so much empathy for that. And also, and it feels very gross to be like, listen, people, I need your money. But also, I do actually. And it's not like we don't have good things to trade for it. So, you know.
I did want to ask about, is there anything in particular that's been working for you of late, product-wise? Anything that's been standing out?
Oh, gosh. I had someone come in yesterday to buy their 3rd copy of the Power Fantasy because they had all the singles and then they bought the trade for themselves and then they gave it away and then they realized they wanted to give 2 more away, so they came in.
Oh my God.
So that's a hit.
Kieran is currently fist pumping as he's listening, I'm guessing.
I hope so, buddy. That book is great. FML is our most subscribed book right now, and
That's amazing.
So delighted about it. Are you reading it?
Oh, yeah. I had Kelly Sue on the podcast last year, and I told her that the first and second issues were the best first and second issues from 2024 in my book. And actually, I think the 4th issue that just came out was the best yet.
Yeah, not only because it had my shop on the cover, but also because it got into my bones and then dragged my heart around the room and then made me laugh and then made me cry some more.
And David Lopez is unbelievable.
The multi-layered work that he is doing with styles, but also with symbolism, with visual metaphor, like there's just so much. It's spectacular. It's so good. And it feels, actually, speaking of my shop on the cover, I had a moment of irritation because the cover A of that book is us. And it's even got like some of the window paint that we have on our windows of like cute animals and stuff. And there's a really clear word bubble that says welcome back. And I was like, welcome back? We haven't had welcome back on our window since, because he went back and found reference for what our comic shop looked like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
When the comic is set.
It's amazing.
What the hell? Like that's...
His attention to detail is spectacular.
Hi there, I'm Chip Zdarsky, former Batman writer, former Howard the Duck writer, and future writer of something else, hopefully. If you're anything like me, you hate comics and the people who make them, including myself. And in this hectic, horrible world, you should know your enemies. Which is why I've created Zdarsky Comic News, a monthly physical newsletter that's only available in comic shops. In ZCN, we keep you up to date on what comic creators are doing to your beloved characters, with interviews and reviews. ZCN has fun features, games, and biting editorials from me, Chip Zdarsky. And I'll be publishing this until things pick up for me at... Oh wait, just a second. Looks like I just got my next assignment. Let's see. Oh, Howard the Duck. Okay. Anyway, check out Zdarsky Comic News in shops everywhere. And if your retailer doesn't carry it, never shop there again.
That's the thing that's interesting is I think some people might think that's like when you look at the idea of sales charts, as much as they exist these days, you would think that like every single shop, the number one selling comic is Absolute Batman because that's number one on the list. But if you like you went through ComicsPRO and you, let's say that there's 300 retailers there. I don't know how many were actually there, but let's say 300.
Sure.
I would say there's probably like 150 different top sellers, maybe.
Yeah.
The actual number one seller. And it makes sense that FML would be number one for you because local creator, very good fit for your audience. It's amazing. I'm guessing your team pushed it and you add all that up and then you have FML being the top book. And I think that's like actually one of the really magical things about comic shops is the fact that like people are like, there's no tastemakers in comics. Yeah, there are. They're called retailers.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we also had a rager launch party for FML. So that helped too.
Oh, with Caitlin Yarsky too for Living Hell, right?
Yep, exactly. What a beautiful book.
Yeah, Caitlin's amazing.
I just, wow. I'm poking at my analytics right now because I always forget things. One of our real frustrations lately has been stuff coming out in really beautiful hardcovers. Because they're really beautiful hardcovers, I order conservatively on them because how many really beautiful hardcover covers am I actually going to get to sell? And then we can't restock them. Makes me lose my mind.
Is there an example that stands out about that?
Most recent has been Helen of Windhorn.
Oh, yeah.
Out yesterday. I got 10. They are gone.
Oh, I'm not surprised. That is a really good comic.
Penguin Random House does not intend to have them back until May. It came out yesterday.
That's silly.
Anzuelo was another one where it's just an absolutely jaw-dropping book. But, you know, especially with that one, there was not even any single issue sales to like gauge numbers on.
Right.
So I ordered, I think, 8, gone first week. And it took 2 months to get more.
Mm-hmm.
They still sell eventually. Like it's not a deal breaker, but it definitely slows down the sort of inertia of the whole thing.
Yeah.
I'm also having a really good time selling all the Absolute books, actually. But especially Absolute Wonder Woman is my favorite of the set.
As it should be.
I guess.
It's so good. It's so good.
The paneling that Hayden Sherman is doing in it is mind-bending.
Yeah.
Every book of theirs feels like a different artist is doing them and a slightly more skilled artist every time. And it's just so cool.
The amazing thing about Hayden Sherman, actually, this is true of Dan Mora too, is like unbelievable artists somehow drawing multiple books a month. I don't understand how that's physically possible.
They must be really far ahead, right?
I have no how I don't know. I don't know if that's possible. I mean, I guess maybe with Batman Dark Patterns, but I mean, so Hayden has Batman Dark Patterns coming out, Into the Unbeing coming out, and Absolute Wonder Woman coming out.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, maybe that's why was it Mattia de Ulis is drawing the next arc or just a few issues of Absolute Wonder Woman, which I mean, what an embarrassment of riches you're talking about when that's your fill-in artist. Oh my God.
They're crushing it. Of course, I love Kelly Thompson, but that's thoroughly on record. I'm just so delighted about comics right now.
Yeah.
Our book club for March is going to be Big Jim and the White Boy, which I did on my own podcast a couple months ago. A fantastic book. And David's just up the way. So I actually get we are in such an amazing time for all sorts of different kinds of comics. It's delightful. I love comics. David.
That's why we do this, right? Both of us.
That's not for the money.
Are you ever surprised by what pops and what doesn't in your shop? Or do you just have a pretty good sense as to what's going to work every time?
I was surprised about Absolute Batman. I was actually genuinely surprised because we almost across the board can't sell Batman. Batman has never been, we just don't have the fan base for it. Even when, I mean, Batman has had really good writers the last handful of runs.
Including Scott Snyder.
Yes, sure. But we are a more Chip Zdarsky, Tom King kind of audience.
Sure.
Tom King sold right up until the Bat Wedding, and then nearly everyone unsubscribed. Chip got some nibbles at the beginning of his run, and then it was gone again. And the logo for Absolute Batman looked so silly. I couldn't get my head around what we were doing there. But as soon as I was reading it, I knew that it was a hit. Like, the joy of it is really remarkable, I think. That it's grim and it's Batman and it's brutal and bad things and Gotham City and all of that, but there is a joy of making comics in it that feels very tactile. There is a sense of, not only do we not have to do things that translate to movies, but we get to do things that don't translate to movies. We get to be goofy and big and weird and camp even. And it's part of the medium, and it's part of like the legacy of doing comics. And I feel like Absolute is the book that got that in a way that's been missing for DC for a while.
Yeah. One of the things I've said about the Absolute books is that their secret superpower is they're really cool. And I know that's a super simple thing to say, but it is absolutely true. I have to say, one of my worst calls the last couple of years was somebody asked me a mailbag question about kind of how I thought that Absolute was going to compare to Ultimate. And on the surface, I actually thought that they didn't have the hook that the Ultimate books did, especially when you're looking at like Ultimate Spider-Man with like the family Peter Parker that so many fans wanted with Hickman and Kato on that book. And then also Peach Momoko doing X-Men. I mean, just like there's some spice there that it didn't on the surface have. But the interesting thing about the Absolute books is to read them is to find them irresistible in some ways. And there's just so much, I don't know, like, I just feel like amazing reading them. Like they just feel like they're full of life in a way that is just fantastic.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I would say that there's like Ultimate Spider-Man does great for us. I'm very happy with most of that line and their sales, but it's not the same spark that we're getting over on the Absolute line.
Mm-hmm.
That said, the Ultimates that came out this week was a joy.
Oh my God, it was amazing. Yeah, I was going to write about, did you read, I don't know if you're reading Fantastic Four, but reading that and Fantastic Four 29 back to back and just seeing how pointed they are for the moment is actually kind of staggering, because good call by Dennis Camp and Ryan North for a scene where all this was headed. They were rather on point. But I did want to ask about something that you're doing on your website that I love. I have no idea how long these things have been going. You have single issue grab bags filled with an array of subjects and randomness, and you also do subscription packs oriented on an array of subjects like Young Adult Book Club, Super Comics for Super Kids, Manga Monthly, and beyond. I love those. Those are great because they're like where do you start? Start with one of these if they fit you. What made those something you wanted to do?
So the subscriptions we've actually been doing since year 2. So that would put us 8 years into running the subscriptions.
So sorry I'm behind that. I don't know how I missed that.
And specifically, they started because I am lucky enough to have a really national and international network of friends and supporters, many of whom are not comic book people, who there's this sort of slump at the beginning of year 2 where your financial model probably said you were going to be sustaining amounts of money by this point, and you're kind of not. I've never seen a shot not go through it, but I was feeling really scared about money, and I sort of whined about it on Facebook, and all of these people were like, we would buy your books if we knew what to buy and how to get them. And I was like, hey, you know what? It's 2017. Send me $20 a month and I will get books in your hands.
Yeah.
And so we started with initially it was just single issue comics. and themed packages of single issue comics, 4 or 5 books per month. We will start you on a series with a number 1 and keep you on that series until you write to us and tell us you want to get off of that train, or until the series ends, and then we'll start you with a new number 1. So each pack is specific to the reader. There is a massive spreadsheet that manages them all.
Amazing.
But they're all individually curated. They all have individual reader notes. So if you write to us and say, hey, my kid loved that last pack, except this book, it was too scary, we'll put a note. And then that'll be like the top of where scary goes for this kid for the next year. And then we'll check in. That is mostly these days maintained by Nico, who is a fabulous employee who's been with us 7 years. And they are very good at keeping track and doing the mailing and the shipping. So those started as a way of sort of reaching out to comics novices nationally. We these days do have people who, for whatever reason, are in town, but still get those subscriptions because maybe they're immunocompromised or bedridden or just don't get to this side of town very often, but they still want to get their books. So we'll just send them. That's fine. And then the grab bags, getting to do the grab bags online is a feature of Comic Shop Assistant. So we have been doing grab bags in store of exactly that style for years. And that's just part of our overstock back issue management strategy. Is that when a book has been through all the stages of book in our store, where it finally lands is in a grab bag, because it's hard to move those random, like, we just have issue 3 of this series and none of the other issues in it. And you can either leave it in the cabinet and wait for somebody to come along who got all the other issues somewhere else but just wants issue 3, or you can put it in a grab bag, clear it out for $1, make it go away. But I like them because they're not as dollar comics are great, but in a lot of ways they rely on you to know what you're looking for. Whereas grab bags that are $10 with 10 books in them mean that you can pick them up because they have a clever name. It's non-threatening. It alleviates the sort of decision fatigue of novice in a comic shop. And you'll probably find at least 1 or 2 things in it that spark your curiosity and make you want to come back and either pick up the series, pick up the trade. Hey, I got this book. I've never heard of this author before. What else do they do? That sort of thing. It's really fun. But with Comic Shop Assistant, there's a bundling tool. So it used to be that what we did was we basically sold all of the books that went into the grab bags to a customer named Grab Bag who had 100% discount. So that we could knock them all out of our inventory at once and then make the grab bags and then just have an inventory count on how many grab bags we had, which works fine for in-store, but is terrible online. Comic Shop Assistant has a bundling tool that lets us know exactly which 10 comics are in each grab bag, even though the grab bag isn't telling you, like the packaging doesn't tell you, but we know, which means if we do want to track down a book that we put into a grab bag, we can theoretically find it. And when you buy the grab bag, you buy all 10 of those books. So they go out of inventory all at the same time. And we don't need to have a pretend customer named Grab Bag who just buys a lot of comics. That is also the mechanism that lets us list them on our Shopify.
I really love the grab bag thing because I kind of got in. I wasn't entirely the reason, but I kind of got into comics because of grab bags, because there would be those I don't know, they could be at comic shops, but I think it was mostly just at random places where you'd be like, plastic cover and you could see through them, and on both sides there'd be an X-Men comic, and I'm like, I gotta get those. I love X-Men. I gotta get the X-Men. I buy it and it's like X-Men, and everything in between is like the Nam and Strike Force Morituri. And so I was like, all right, I'm just reading whatever. And I think that's like, in a weird way, I actually think it made me a more adventurous reader because I never knew what I was going to get. And I'm just like, I'm reading all of these because I spent my allowance on this and I don't care. I'm reading those X-Men books and I'm reading the NAM, whatever. And I love that you do that. That's great.
Yeah, it's so they all have a age rating on them, and the age rating is the rating of the highest rated book in the thing. So we try to group them together so that if you buy a mature pack, it's mostly mature. And likewise, but you're never going to get an all ages with like one I Hate Fairyland thrown in there for fun. They're good. They're fun. They're nice. And they keep my cabinets from getting too full.
That, the grab bag customer did make me think, or will kind of wonder about this. I know this is kind of different for everyone, but how much of the job of running a comic shop are the things that no one could ever envision as being part of running a comic shop?
So much. I just did baby's first board up outside. I've never boarded up a broken window before, but that's not true. I've done a really bad board up before, but the one I just did was good. Weddings, funerals.
I came there in January 2024, right after a crazy ice storm, actually during a crazy ice storm. And I'm pretty sure you were chipping ice outside and out front of your place at that very moment when I walked in. And so I've seen you doing other jobs as assigned.
Yeah. Other jobs as assigned is precisely correct. We also, we use our garden for events in the warm months, and our garden is my garden, right? So on the one hand, oh, you're sick, don't worry about your gardening. But on the other hand, you know what? I actually need the garden because we have an event coming up and
you want it to look nice.
Somebody's got to prune the roses.
Yeah.
So that's part of shop work too. I do love that reading is genuinely a part of doing the job, and it makes me really sad how many retailers let themselves forget that.
Mm-hmm. I bet it's part of how you maintain passion for it.
It's how you maintain passion for it. It's how you sell it. It's how you know what to buy. It's how you know what to advertise. And you can do all that by the numbers, but I genuinely don't think you can. Or at least I don't know why you would.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. More campaigns, more big names launching on Zoop. Now live are a gorgeous art book from DC mainstay Adriana Mello, as well as the complete digest edition of Skull Kickers from Jim Zub and Edwin Huang. There is also time to support AWA Studios' Artists for LA, a benefit campaign to raise funds for those affected by the Los Angeles wildfires. Contributors include Bill Sienkiewicz, Mike Diodato, Dennis Cowan, and many more. Original art, signatures, and other items are available, with proceeds going to the California Fire Foundation Wildfire and Disaster Relief Fund and the California Community Foundation Wildfire Recovery Fund. Zoop would like to thank all the creators who have recently submitted projects and urge all creators to submit your project to Zoop. Click the Submit Your Project link at zoop.gg as they are providing services to even more creators than ever before. And now, back to the show. And it's hard to fake passion. I mean, that's like one of the things I always would point out to, I always bring up to Patrick Brower from Challengers when he comes on the podcast that The Sixth Gun was a big hit at their shop because they loved it. It wasn't because, I mean, also it was a good comic, but it wasn't a giant hit I don't want to say anywhere else, but it wasn't like the number one book for anyone else because I don't know if anyone pushed it the same way Patrick and Dal did. And like when you were, connected to your comic shop and somebody there is passionate about it, that is going to dramatically increase the likelihood you're going to buy something. I mean, when I was in the shop in January of 2024, Nick, one of your employees, sold me a bunch of books because Nick was really into it. And it's hard to fake that.
Which book did he sell you?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I have so many comics, Katie.
Do you really?
So many comics. You can see some of them, but
I can.
Oh my God.
Can.
But I bought like 3 books and like 10 zines from you that day. So
that sounds real.
And a Books with Pictures shirt, which I forgot to wear today, and a Books with Pictures tote bag. So I got loaded up.
I love that.
So you have your ComicsPRO hat. You have your Comet Standard hat as part of it. You're doing things like the graphic novel library. Do you think that your varying hats influence each other? Like, do you think that like some of your work at Books with Pictures can trigger something like the graphic novel library, whatever that may entail, and vice versa? Like, do you see influence from both sides?
Absolutely. All the time. And like, if I didn't run a comic shop, I wouldn't care about comics data. But in particular, if I weren't doing the work of ordering and receiving in a comic shop, I wouldn't care about comics data. Like, I can see being the kind of owner who is one level of remove above that, who just never realizes the impact that bad data is having on their retailers, because if you're not doing the ordering and the listing online and the receiving and the selling, you're not seeing how much time bad data takes to fix or to compensate for, or just plain breaks things. You don't see it. I will say, and it's not a bad segue if you're up for a segue.
Sure.
So one of the things that I love doing at the shop is that I help librarians and teachers and school librarians put together curricula and library collections for the institutions they work for. And one of the best examples of that this past, I think we're 3 years into our partnership, is a small school district in Portland called Parkrose. And Parkrose is not the central city behemoth school district. It's one that's sort of out to the east suburbs, east edge of town, that has got, I think it's 7 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and a high school. And that's it. So it's a sort of like ship in a bottle of a school district. And they, a few years ago, came to me and proposed, hey, would it be okay if all of our librarians came in and did a shopping day with you? And we will just send them with, the P card, and they have their budget, and they can just come and shop. And the first time we did that, it was extremely fun and extremely disorganized. And I did not know what I was getting into, but they were all such lovely people. And so it's 10 school librarians who all work very closely with each other, discovering things, getting recommendations from me, getting recommendations from the staff, running over to each other to show them a book. All these librarians collaborating together. We started surfacing challenges. They all wanted the same book, and I can order 6 more, but you wanted to pay with the P card today, and that's actually going to look more like a purchase order. And how long does it take to get a purchase order paid? And you ordered 7 copies of that book, but since you did, and we put in the purchase order, that book's gone out of production and I can't get any more, even though it was on my shelf when you came in. Or your students requested this manga series that you wanted me to get. It's not appropriate for them. We should have a conversation about that. All of those things. And so now we've sort of worked out a collaborative style where they'll send me lists, we'll bounce things back and forth, we'll talk about budget, and they buy literally a couple thousand graphic novels from me every year for their district.
That's amazing.
And this year, when they were in, one of them said to another one, not to me, I moved all of my junior literary guild or junior library guild money over onto my books with pictures budget this year because they just want the graphic novels. And I went up to her and I said, if there were an equivalent service for graphic novels, would you be interested in participating in that? And she said, well, if you were running it, which is a fair answer and very flattering, but it's a conversation that my business partner in Eugene, Andrea Gilroy, and I had before, that maybe there's something we want to be doing with the educational market. But that conversation with that librarian really sparked a new conversation with Andrea about what kind of services do schools and libraries need that's different than what we can provide in the comic shop, and how can we turn this into a project that functions?
Mm-hmm.
So the graphic novel library is that. It is conceived of right now as a nonprofit, and we're still in our paperwork for it. And the idea is that if the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund is the defense for comics and graphic novels, then what we want to be is a sort of charm offensive, specifically into educational markets for comics and graphic novels. We want to say not just it's not bad to have comics and graphic novels, but it is actively good, and you should have well-developed comic collections in your schools and libraries because they're what people want, because they develop really interesting multimodal literacy, because they are good for people with learning disabilities. There's so many reasons that you should have them circulating in your collections, and that's different than saying the graphic and graphic novel doesn't mean porn. And it's really important that we have the CBLDF to do that work, but it's not enough to move the industry to where I want to see it and to move comics literacy to where I want to see it. So right now we are organizing, we are doing a lot of interviewing of librarians, which is great because librarians are some of the best people in the world. We're doing a lot of visiting libraries and seeing what their graphic novel collection looks like now. And a lot of what we're hearing is just that things like Scholastic are pretty well represented in schools and libraries. They get the educational market. Scholastic understands the educational market, but things that are direct market focused are absolute nonsense to librarians, especially because DC stopped putting numbers on spines a couple years ago, because Marvel keeps taking this set of Spider-Gwen out of print and putting it back into print in a different collection sequence. And so if one of your library books walked out the door and didn't come back again, you can't replace it one-to-one because that book's not in print anymore. But if you want to have those stories, you can get them in this other format. That's too much for a librarian to know when they're also managing story time and like trying to keep John Grisham in stock. Like, it's just too much. So those are the sorts of expertise that we have. Plus, Andrea has a PhD in manga that I really want to be bringing into that market, both in terms of consulting, helping with collection development, having subscriptions like what I do in the store for manga readers, but to schools and libraries based on their specifications, and really helping them get their graphic novel collections up to where they need to be. And then also organizing things like author appearances, book clubs, etc., that again, the direct market side of the market doesn't understand how to work with libraries. So we want to be that.
That's amazing. I mean, it literally built from Books with Pictures experience, which is amazing. I love that. Not that you're going to like find it in your budget to come up to Alaska, but Alaska has some good libraries.
Alaska does have some good libraries.
We have some really good ones. Yeah. They brought up Raina not long ago and it was fantastic.
Part of organizing as a nonprofit is intended to let us do some of the outreach that otherwise wouldn't be affordable. And also, like, my dearest hope is that we also find a way to make books to higher needs schools dramatically less expensive so that we can give the services that we have under market rate to schools that need them. That's my hope. And it really is just going to depend on finding the right donors and the right grants. And it is a weird time to be looking for grants. And it is a weird time to be trying to operate as a new nonprofit. And we just, I really think it's something that fills a very distinct and like well-defined need.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a whole nother full-time job, which I probably don't need, but like, I'm really excited about it. So we'll make time.
I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about. You got to follow your passions, whether that means, recommending the power of fantasy or doing graphic novel library. But you did mention weird time. I do want to ask about navigating the environment right now because famously there is a Diamond comic distributor's bankruptcy. There's the on again, off again tariffs. There's the general weirdness in the economy. There is all the other nonsense. There's even things like I saw you trying to kind of navigate the economic blackout on February 28th, where you're trying to be like, please don't forget, local stores, local shops, because like we are not part of that. All these things are outside of your control. What do you do to manage all that, or at least manage the stress that comes from it?
In the world of finding bright sides to managing chronic pain, I have definitely had to get better at recognizing what's outside of my control. That doesn't mean I always do it, but the first round of tariff panic a month ago, I got pretty engaged with, and then it disappeared. And I feel like that was actually a good lesson for what the political strategy is right now and how I was surrendering to it, and that it is probably better for me to step back and say that there are many challenges and many ways that we will weather them. But there's this tricky thing in my own brain as somebody, again, who's been doing this for 9 years now, is that at the beginning of COVID, it felt really important to stay on top of the news and pivot every time things changed. And it felt like only by pivoting and then pivoting again and then pivoting again were we going to make it through. And I think that's probably true, that's how we made it through. But a global pandemic and whatever nonsense is happening in the White House right now are different things.
Right.
And trying to pivot every time somebody wakes up on the wrong side of the bed is not a good use of my time and energy. And I just, right now, I feel like trying to be proactive is leading to me wasting a lot of energy because I'm being proactive about things that don't wind up being real.
Yeah.
And so as far as the politics go, and the tariffs and whatever else, I feel like I really need to be waiting until I understand the impact on me before I react to it, at least before my business reacts to it. And that's sort of where I sit with it right now, is that there's just too much vapor legislation happening, that seems much more oriented toward manipulating the stock market.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote on Sketched when I wrote about tariffs last time that I am only going to write about them when something concrete happens, because I mean, what was it, 48 hours this time?
Yeah.
And last time it didn't even really happen. And it's just like, it's like this constant bomb of anxiety. And then it ends up backtracking because they realize that this is not good. Well, I don't even want to say it's not, they realize that's not how economies should work, because that's giving them way too much credit. They backtrack for whatever reason they feel like. And it seems like that's a healthy mindset, though. And it seems like, I don't know, maybe that is something you have built up because you've been doing this long enough, and because you have these other experiences where they allow you to recognize what you can control amongst the chaos.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe I'm just tired.
Maybe you're just tired. Katie, that is a completely reasonable thing, but I'm going to give you some of your time back so you have one less thing to be tired about, because that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about Books with Pictures, ComicsPRO. 9 years of Books with Pictures, almost 10. I really appreciate you taking the time.
David, it is always a pleasure. I know you only have guests on like once a year, but call me. You know how to get me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with retailer Katie Pryde. You can find her on Blue Sky, in Portland, Oregon's comic shop Books with Pictures, and this shop on Blue Sky and Instagram. As per usual, big thanks to Deanna Chapman for editing this week's episode. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today, and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription site, Sketched, at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Blue Sky and Instagram, or following me on Blue Sky and Instagram. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Scion, Megan Marsden, T.S. Luther, Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast, Scott Carpenter, Gus, M.K. Frygeist, Saunter, Brian, Chris Robinson, David Byrne, Milton Lawson, Benjamin Wilkins, Chris Hacker, John Neesmith, John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Brandon Heyman, Aiden Hammond, Faith Aaron Hicks, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polges, Tom Evans, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Near Levy, Jason Hussad, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Dennis Hoffman, Jingo Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Klaus Vandeven, Submen Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Rob Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePills, Patrick Power, Declan Shelby, Dan Carino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Liana Kingus, Nick Bennett, Susanna Pola, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Robert Wilson IV, Andrew Carita, Stephen Hull, Philip Myra, Chris Pacella, Torrin Grudenbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vieta Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.